Salut, bienvenue. That means welcome to this lesson, le présent de l'indicatif. So in today's lesson, we're going to study the present tense of verbs, regular and irregular, for the beginner. So we're not going to tackle all the verbs, but the ones that are most common and the ones that definitely help us go by on our daily basis. So let's start with the regular verbs. What is a regular and an irregular verb? So a lot of times we are confused. We can't tell what means regular, what means irregular. Simply put, a regular verb follows a rule. And in French, just like in English and every other language, there are certain verbs that do not follow the established rule for that tense. When they can't follow that rule, it just means they're irregular, okay? So let's look at the ones that can follow the rule. So in French, there are three main groups of verbs that end, so it's the endings that determine what they are. The first one is the group that ends in ER, RE and IR. So we're going to get to them one by one, okay? So the ER verbs, there's only one rule to follow. That's what this means over here. Il y a une règle à suivre, okay? Just one rule to follow. And that rule means you look at the ending right here, ER, on enlève la terminaison. It means we get rid of this ending, and we're going to add a set of endings that match this particular ER group, okay? So what are those endings? For je, which means I, we add an E. So you got rid of the R, you're going to add an E. For tu, you add ES. For il, elle, and on, remember he, she, and this guy over here means we, but we conjugate it as a singular, okay? So we add an E. Nous, we add ONS. Vous, we add EZ. And then il and elle, they, right? We add ENT. So this is the first rule. For ER verbs, you get rid of that ER ending. You add E, ES, E, ONS, EZ, ENT. An example of a verb that ends in ER that follows this rule is the verb marcher. So marcher means to walk. And if you want to say, I walk, you walk, he walks, so on and so forth, this is how it works. Notice we took out the ER, so we're following the rule, and we replaced that with the ending that matches each subject pronoun. So for je, we said that it's an E. There you go. Je marche, I walk. Tu marches, you walk. It can also be used to say you are walking, okay? So there's no difference in French. Then, il marche, he walks. Elle marche, she walks. On marche, we walk. This on is informal. We use it a lot among friends, on your day-to-day thing. It's not a formal thing to say. But another way of saying we is nous. So, nous marchons, ONS. Vous marchez, that's vous. This vous is plural, you as a group of people, but it can also be the respectful, formal way in French of treating someone. So if you don't know someone, that is older than you, in a position of authority and so on, you never address that person with a tu in French. You address the person as a vous, even if it's just one person, okay? And then you have the masculine plural, they, which it means ils, right? Don't pronounce the S though. It's il marche, okay? And then for the feminine elles, same rule. Do not pronounce the S. It's always elle. Elle marche, okay? So, je marche, tu marches, il marche, elle marche, on marche, nous marchons, vous marchez, il marche, elle marche, okay? And yes, NT is also silent over here, all right? So that takes care of the first group. Moving on to the second group, still within the regular verbs. So the second group is the group that ends in RE. It also has one rule to follow. Just like ER, we're going to take away, so on enlève la terminaison RE. So we get rid of the RE. And we're going to add a set of endings. Unfortunately, they are different from the ER. So you're going to have to memorize these as well. But they're not that complicated. For the plural form, they are actually the same as ER endings. So what are the endings for RE? Well, for je, once you get rid of RE, you add an S. For tu, the same thing, add an S. For il, elle, and on, we add nothing. That's what rien means, add nothing. So leave it as is. Leave the racine, le radical du verbe, that means that root, leave it as is, okay? Then you have for nous, ONS, just like ER, for vous, EZ, and for il and elle, ENT, okay? And once you apply this, you see that it's the same thing as we did with marcher. So there's an example, vendre. The verb vendre means to sell. And so when we conjugate it, we have this RE that we need to remove, and we apply the new set of endings, okay? So for je, we have S. For tu, we have S. For il, elle, and on, nothing. Remember, that was rien. And then for nous, ONS. For vous, EZ. And for il and elle, plural, we have ENT. Now, this S is here, but it's silent. Tricky. Don't pronounce the S. So, je vends. Okay? And you don't even hear the D. Je vends. Tu vends. Il vend. Elle vend. On vend. And then, nous vendons. Here you do hear the D, but you do not hear the S. Okay? Nous vendons. Vous vendez. Silent Z as well. Ils vendent. Elle vende. And T is silent. Okay? So, I sell. You sell. He sells. She sells. We sell. This is also we sell. You plural sell. They masculine sell. And they feminine sell. Okay? So that takes care of the two groups. The last group that is considered regular, remember, they follow a certain rule. Il y a une règle à suivre. And it proceeds. It actually works the same way as the previous two. Okay? So you look at the ending IR. That's the third group. You are going to get rid of the ending IR, and you're going to also add, just like we've been doing to the previous two, you're going to add the endings for IR verbs. Unfortunately, it's also a new set of endings, so you can't be using the same endings for the three groups. It only happens here in the present tense, but there are three different sets of endings that we need to use, okay? And they are, for je, IS. For tu, IS. Il, elle, on, we have the IT. And then for nous, not only is it ONS, but there's an extra thing we need to add, which is ISS, ONS. It's pronounced ils. And then for vous, ISS, IZ, IC. And then for il and elle, besides the ENT, there's also that ISS. Okay, so ISS, ENT, IS. NT is always, always silent. Okay, so how does this look when we put it in a verb? And I chose this verb purposely because when you get rid of the IR, the root of the verb, the radical, has an IS. And many students assume that this IS is part of the ending. It's already the ending. It's not. Okay, so once you get rid of the IR, just like the rule tells us to do, this is the root of the verb, le radical. That's not an ending, okay? You bring this guy and you add endings and it looks like this, okay? So, je choisis. You still add that IS. This IS over here has nothing to do with the ending, okay? Tu choisis. Don't pronounce the S. Il choisit. Don't pronounce the T. Elle choisit. On choisit. And then, moving on. Nous choisissons. Vous choisissez, ils choisissent, elles choisissent. Okay? So, even though, again, there's an IS over here, it's not an ending, you still need to add the IR endings. I choose, you choose, he chooses, she chooses, we choose, again, we choose, you plural or formal choose, they masculine choose, and they feminine choose. And these are the three main groups of verbs that are considered regular in French. Now, do we have verbs that don't follow this rule? Yes, we do. And there are two different ones. There are the ones that are completely irregular. They follow no rule. And you have the ones that somewhat follow the rule, but they change a few things or we need to add different things to them. Case in point is the verb, one of the most common verbs is prendre. Okay, the general sense of this word means to take. right? So prendre, as we saw, is an RE verb. Now, the rule says, get rid of that ending and add SS nothing, ONS, EZ, ENT. And it's true to a certain extent because the endings are actually the same. What's not the same is le radical, this root here, right, that we are going to use. And this is what it looks like. So, the je and the tu, il, elle, on, they actually follow the rule. So it's regular for these three persons, right? So je prends S, tu prends S, il, elle, on prend nothing. But then if you look at the nous, it would make sense, right, to have that D there and say nous prendons, because that's what the rule establishes. For some reason, the D gets lost. It disappears. So it becomes a little irregular. It's not following the rule exactly as it should. So it becomes prenons, okay? And then the same thing for vous, prenez. And then for il and elle plural, it gets even more interesting. Not only did the D disappear, we actually double the N. And it becomes ils prennent, elles prennent. Now, a lot of people don't understand why double consonants exist in some verbs in French, but there's an explanation for that. The reason why, and we're going to see a few, the reason why this extra N is here, it's not because they felt like adding a letter. It actually tells me when I'm reading that I have to open that vowel. Okay, what does that mean? It means that over here with one N, that E is basically silent. You hardly hear it. When I move to this one over here that has a double N, I need to hear that E. That's why there's a double N. So, nous prenons, vous prenez, but over here, ils prennent and elles prennent. So instead of an accent, it has a double N. Okay, there you go. So a little exception, a verb that is somewhat regular and somewhat irregular. Okay? So, the same way we saw prendre, there are other verbs that follow exactly the same sort of rule. They are regular, but we need to change a few things. And those few things are actually extremely important because they are what allows us to pronounce and write the verbs correctly. Another small exception is goes for verbs that need an accent, and it's an accent grave. And the accent grave is the accent that goes backwards, as we're going to see. Case in point here is the verb acheter. Acheter means to buy, okay? So acheter, notice how this E over here is basically silent. It's an ER verb, so it belongs to the first group, and it does follow the rule for ER verbs. In other words, you need to add E, ES, E, ONS, EZ, ENT to the endings, all right? So what changes is this silent E over here, okay? And this is what it looks like. Now, the silent E becomes a pronounced EE. So in order to do that, and instead of doing a double T like we saw for prendre, there was a double N. In this case, just the way it is, we added that accent grave, which is going backwards, okay? And so it goes from acheter to j'achète. We don't say j'achète, we say j'achète. Because of that, you need to put that accent there. Notice that the ending is the same, just like any ER verb. Then tu achètes, same thing. Don't pronounce the S at the end. Open that E because there's that accent grave. Il achète, elle achète, on achète. Okay? And when you are going to pronounce this word together over here, the on achète, you're going to do what the French called une liaison. You're actually going to connect the end to the vowel and you say on achète. Okay? On achète. That N is there. Moving on, this is where there is that exception to the rule. Why don't we have an accent over here? Well, the reason for that is because the syllable that we emphasize in nous and vous is the last one. It's the ending. So we don't say nous achetons, we say nous achetons. And we went back to this original form here, the infinitive, right? That E is not pronounced, so we don't need an accent. Nous achetons. Notice that the S and the A are also doing that liaison. It's like a Z sound. We have the nous, achetons. In French, when you have words such as this that end in a consonant and begin with a vowel, we do that little connection and it becomes nous achetons. Same thing for vous. Vous, and then here we don't say achète, we say acheter, right? And again, you do the liaison. Vous achetez, okay? But then for il and elle plural, it goes back to opening the vowel. And so you need to put the accent grave. Ils achètent, that Z sound. Ils achètent, elles achètent. Okay? So you never pronounce the S at the end of the word if it's followed by a consonant. But once you have that vowel, that S gets a Z sound to it. Okay? Ils achètent, elles achètent. Over here we saw the N as well. On achète. Moving on to another example of a verb that needs an accent grave. So there are a few. For example, the verb se lever, right? We're going to look at the reflexive verbs later on. There's a few like that. But this one in particular is very interesting because it already has accents there. And it's the second E over here that is going to make the difference. If the accent is going this way, it's called an accent aigu, right? Accent grave goes backwards. This one going that way, frontwards, is the accent aigu. And this accent aigu is going to change, just like we saw with acheter, into accent grave, okay? Because this verb as it is here, this is called an infinitive, right? A verb that has not been conjugated is infinitive. In English, we say to prefer. So there's that to. That's what makes it infinitive. Now, over here, this is préférer, préférer. And when you conjugate it, that E is going to become E. That's what the accent does. This accent aigu makes it E. The accent grave is going to make it E. And it looks like that. Okay? So, the first one we don't touch. It stays as pré, okay, for throughout. It's the second one we touch. It's an ER verb, so the endings we don't need to worry about because it's regular when it comes to the endings. It's the same thing. It's over here, now we need to pay attention to. So, je préfère, okay, that eh. Tu préfères, il préfère, elle préfère, on préfère, to prefer, obviously. And then over here, same idea, just like acheter. We emphasize, we stress out ONS and EZ. So we don't need to open that vowel. It goes back to the original accent. Don't get rid of the accent, okay? If you don't need the accent grave, you need to leave the one that was there before, okay? Because it's not préférons, it's still préférons, right? So nous préférons, vous préférez, but then we're going to open that E again. Il préfère, elle préfère. And this is why you need to change that accent aigu into an accent grave. Okay? Next one. Next one is the verbs with double consonants. So les verbes à double consonne. In some cases, and again, it's just the way it is. In some cases, like we just saw with acheter, we take the accent. So we put an accent grave. If there is an accent aigu, like we saw with préférer, we change it to accent grave as well. But then there are other verbs that also need to open that E, and for some reason, instead of an accent grave, we double the consonant. And one of those verbs is the verb appeler, right? Appeler means to call, okay? It does, s'appeler is also a verb. We're not there yet. We'll do a lesson on reflexive verbs. This one, just to call, okay? In this case, that E, as you can see, is also sort of silent, appeler. But when we conjugate it, it's going to open into an E, just like the ones before. And instead of putting an accent grave, in this case, we actually double the consonant like we did with prendre for il and elle that was prenne, all right? This follows the same rule. I need to pronounce this E, so instead of saying j'appelle, it's going to be j'appelle. That is the reason why we double that L. Same thing for tu. Tu appelles. Il appelle. Elle appelle. And remember the on followed by the A, we do that liaison. On appelle. Now, nous and vous, if you take a look at it, there's only one L. And the reason for that is the same. It's because we emphasize ONS and we emphasize EZ. So we don't have a need to open that E. It goes back to its original form, remember, of one L. So nous appelons, not nous appelons, but nous appelons, vous appelez. And then il and elle, plural, we need to open the E again, and it becomes double L. So, ils appellent, remember the liaison? Elles appellent. That's your double L again to open that, right? So now we have a few others, okay? And these are the verbs that they are still ER verbs. They are still using the same endings for ER verbs. But before that ER, there's either an AY, OY, or UY, okay? So this Y here and Y is what's going to change when you start conjugating the verb. And how does it change? Well, change le Y en I, sauf pour nous et vous. What does that mean? It means that you're going to change that I. It should have an apostrophe here. I left it like this so that you see it individually. Normally, we get rid of that E and put an apostrophe, but I left it like this for you to see that this is what's going to change, okay? So this E is going to change, Y, right? This Y is going to change into an I, I. Look at the verb payer, to pay. Following this rule, it's an ER verb. You're going to add the ER endings, but you're going to change that Y into an I. You're going to do exactly what it says, right? So, je paie. Tu paies. Il paie. Elle paie. On paie. Nous payons. Notice how this payons now goes back to that Y. Vous payez. Il paie. And elle paie. Okay, so that's all you have to remember here. It follows the rule E-E-S-E, O-N-S, E-Z-E-N-T, but the Y becomes I for je, tu, il, elle, singular, on, and il and elle, plural. Keep it as a Y for nous and vous, right? That's basically it for regular verbs, and these are the most common you're going to encounter at the early stages of learning French as, you know, A1 students. Now, moving on to the irregular verbs. And remember what I said at the beginning, regular verbs follow an established rule. The ones that don't, it's what we have here. They become irregular. Ce sont les verbes irréguliers. What does that mean? Ces verbes ont les mêmes terminaisons à l'infinitif, mais ils, right? Mais ils ne suivent pas les règles des verbes au présent de l'indicatif. This means these verbs that we are going to look at now that are irregular, okay, have the same endings in the infinitive. That means they end in ER, RE, or IR. The problem is that they do not follow the rule once you start conjugating them. An ER verb in this case does not necessarily mean E-E-S, E-O-N-S, E-Z-E-N-T, just like R-E-S-S, nothing, O-N-S, E-Z-E-N-T, and so on. It means that they are going to have their own set of endings. The most common ones, les plus communs sont. So the most common ones are, and we're going to look at them, avoir. So ends in IR, but it doesn't follow the IS, IT, so on and so forth rule, okay? So avoir, to have. Être, to be. Aller, to go. Faire, to do. Vouloir, to want. Pouvoir, to be able to. We also use it to express the idea of can, like I can do this. So that's pouvoir. Devoir, to have to, and it also expresses the idea of must. I must study, for example. Savoir, to know something. Voir, to see. Dire, to say, to tell. Okay, depends. Lire, to read. Écrire, to write. Vivre, to live. Okay. Venir, to come. Sortir, to go out. Partir, to go away or to leave. And dormir, to sleep. It's not an exhausted list. There's just a few of the most common ones. We will definitely have many, many more to look at. But for now and at this early stage, these are perhaps the most important ones. Malheureusement, that means unfortunately. Il faut les mémoriser. You have to memorize them. There's no way of knowing them since they are so different. And for the purpose of this lesson, I'm going to conjugate the first one, avoir. Then I will have another lesson just with the conjugations for the other verbs. But you can look them up online. You can find the conjugation for these verbs everywhere for you to start studying them and knowing them. But let's look at the first one, avoir, which means to have. Okay, this is also the verb we use to express age and to express certain feelings and emotions, okay, especially physical. So in French, if you want to say I am 20 years old, you are going to use the verb to have, which is the idea is I have lived for 20 years. I've been living for 20 years, okay? So never ever use the verb to be, which is être, just like we do in English when you say I am 20. So in French, you're going to say I have 20 years old. And this is the verb you use, okay, avoir. And notice that it ends in IR. It should be part of the third group, but it's not. And even if we take out that IR, we are not using AVO. So nothing from this word is being used for nous and vous, the first 2 or 3 letters, okay? So it becomes j'ai. That's how you pronounce. That means I have or I'm having, right? So j'ai. Next, tu as. Don't pronounce the S. Tu as. You have. Next one, il a. He has. Elle a. She has. On a. Okay, we have. Now remember, this is a vowel. This guy ends in an N. This on a becomes on a. Okay, pronounce the N, connect. It sounds like one word. Then we're going to do the same thing with the S and the A in nous and avons, right? So nous avons. Nous avons becomes nous avons. We have. Then we have the vous, and for vous it's avez. Do the liaison. Vous avez. You have. You plural. And then il, plural, masculine. On, so ils ont. And then elle, the feminine. Elle, on, same thing. Elles ont. They have. Again, j'ai, tu as, il a, elle a, on a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont, elles ont. And this is the end of this lesson on le présent de l'indicatif, the present tense of verbs. I do have some sample exercises, some exercises for you to practice. They'll become available very soon. I'll post the link below. If you subscribe and you hit that notification, you will be able to know when I upload more videos, as I am going through all the grammar points we need to know to start learning French and becoming French speakers and really experts in French language. À la prochaine. I'll see you on the next video.